This is my 8-gallon Wallstad Better Fish tank, and I'm going to use it as an example to show you how to get rid of algae in your aquarium in less than a week with a real-time follow-along using this tank's initial setup. For anyone short on time, the method is based on adding Amano Shrimp, Neocaridina Shrimp and Nerite Snails to the aquarium. I use this algae-eating crew in all of my tanks, and they do a great job of quickly managing the initial algae that grows in a new tank, but they also do a great job of staying on top of most types of other algae that can grow in a mature tank. I just want to quickly go over each of these algae eaters and share why I like them and why they're included in this specific setup, but everything is timestamped so you can just skip ahead to the follow along if you like. The Amano Shrimp is considered to be one of the best algae eaters in the hobby, and it's for good reason, and in my experience these guys eat a ton of algae every single day, but they also eat a wide range of different algae types. This helps to keep your tank absolutely spotless because unlike some of the other algae eaters, this guy will just pick at any bit of algae it can find. Amano Shrimp are also excellent cleanup members as they eat detritus, dead fish, leftover fish food and biofilm in your aquarium as well. These little guys are probably the best picker type algae eater out of the ones that I've tried, and I would prioritise Amano Shrimp over the other two algae eaters in this setup if you can only go for one of them. Unfortunately, these guys do require brackish water to reproduce, so it is difficult for hobbyists to breed them in their tank when compared to something like Neocaridina Shrimp, so these usually do have a slightly higher price tag when you buy them, but in my experience they are definitely worth it. Next up we have Neocaridina Shrimp, with cherry shrimp being the most common variant of these shrimp in the hobby, and in my opinion these are probably the most underrated algae eater in the hobby when used in this specific way. I'll actually link to this study from Tropica in this video's description if you want to check it out, but basically they found that by the actual weight and size of the animal, Neocaridina Shrimp were the second best algae eater tested when it comes to soft algae types, second only to Amano Shrimp. The main drawback of Neocaridina Shrimp is that they only really seem to focus on soft algae types, but we're actually going to use this to compound the algae eating abilities of the other two members of the crew. In addition to soft algae, these little guys will also eat detritus, biofilm and leftover fish food in your tank. One of my favourite things about Neocaridina Shrimp is the wide range of colours that they're available in, and I currently have red Neocaridina, yellow Neocaridina and orange Neocaridina Shrimp in my tanks, but there's plenty of different colours out there to meet your needs. Once Neocaridina Shrimp are happy with their tank conditions, they'll start to breed at a rapid pace, and in my tanks once I've decided they're ready to breed, there's no stopping them and the numbers quickly grow. This is one of the things that I honestly think make these an underrated algae eater, because the vast majority of people can easily breed these in most tank setups without issue, so a couple of Neocaridina Shrimp added to your aquarium will quickly expand in number. Take my 8-gallon Wallstad Better Fish tank for example. I only added 5 red Neocaridina Shrimp to this tank around 2 months ago, and they've already had 2 sets of babies, and I'd guess that there's around 20 shrimp in here now. All of these hungry mouths will be eating the soft algae, the detritus, then the biofilm and any leftover fish food they can find in their tank, using all of that up as quickly as possible, so the other algae eaters such as the Amano Shrimp and the Nerite Snail will be forced to go off and eat the other types of algae. So moving on to the final algae eater in this specific setup, and it's the Nerite Snail, and there's a bunch of different types of Nerite Snail out there in the hobby, and I've seen different people say some Nerite Snail types are better at eating certain types of algae than others, but I've only really tried 2 different types. At the time of recording this video, I've only kept horned Nerite Snails that are sometimes called Cleathon Snails and zebra Nerite Snails in my own aquariums, but for my needs both of these do the job. One of the main advantages of Nerite Snails over other popular aquatic snails in the hobby is that they are unable to reproduce in fresh water. This might not sound like much of an advantage because you'll have to purchase new ones for every new tank that you set up, but other types of aquatic snail can breed at a rapid pace and dominate the aquarium. One of my friends actually had a problem with baby snails getting into her filter even though she had a decent pre-filter on it, and it ended up getting crushed in the impeller of the filter and breaking it, and it was a pretty expensive filter, but thankfully this isn't a risk with Nerite Snails. These little guys do seem to eat a wide range of algae types, and they do seem to eat a lot of algae as well, but these are scraper type algae eaters, so they usually do better on hard surfaces such as your aquarium glass or hardscape. I want to quickly touch on stocking your algae eaters for your tank size as well, because this is another point that's commonly overlooked on forums and social media. There are some different variables in this one, but personally I like to add 1 Amano Shrimp per 10 litres of water, so that's roughly every 2.5 US gallons of water. I also like to keep 1 Neocaridina Shrimp per 5 litres of tank water or every 1.2 US gallons of water, but keep in mind you can start these with a small count because they will start breeding at a rapid pace. And when it comes to horned Nerite snails, keep in mind these are the smaller ones. I usually like to keep one for every 15 litres of water or every 4 US gallons of water, but the larger types of Nerite snails such as the zebra Nerite snail, I usually keep one in every 30 litres of water or around every 8 US gallons. Personally, I do think that this is one of the best ways to stock these algae eaters out, as Neocaridina shrimp are cheap and they will breed in your tank and they'll deal with the softer algae types and encourage the Amano shrimp and Nerite snails to go off and eat the more difficult types of algae, so you keep your costs down on the more expensive algae eaters. So finally getting onto the actual follow along of removing the algae in this aquarium, and this is what it looked like on day one when I initially added the algae eaters to the tank. The dwarf hairgrass in the foreground is covered in brown diatom algae with some soft green algae being on specific parts of it. The Sterigani repens in the midground of the tank has brown algae all over it, and on the right hand side there is a little bit of green algae forming. And then all of the stem plants in the background of the tank have brown diatom algae, some soft green algae and some other types of algae which look like some type of green hair algae starting to grow. So with this tank being around 8 US gallons or 30 litres total volume not including this substrate, I'll be adding 1 zebra Nerite snail, 3 Amano shrimp and 5 Neocaridina shrimp. So I added my algae eaters to the tank and they quickly got to work eating the various types of algae on the plants. Both of the types of shrimp started grazing as soon as I put them in the tank, and the Nerite snail did seem to take a nap, and it does seem to prefer to sleep during the day and be more active during the night. As I mentioned earlier, people often look down on Neocaridina shrimp when it comes to using them as algae eaters, but look at these little guys go. I see this in all of my tanks as well that I put these guys in. They jump on the soft algae straight away and get through it, so the Amanos and Nerites go off and eat the other algae types. But with there being so much soft algae in this tank right now, the Amano shrimp are also helping, but they have spread out across the tank and some of them are eating the other algae types as well. So moving on to day 2, and this is what the algae eaters had managed to achieve in under 24 hours. The brown algae on the Sterigani repens has almost gone already, and there was a slight reduction in the algae on the hairgrass and stem plants at this point. I was a little curious about how this specific algae eating crew would perform with the algae on the hairgrass, as it is the first time I've used this plant, but the little arms on the shrimp seem to make it easy for them to just rip the algae out of it and eat it. The Amano shrimp were eating algae every single time I looked in this tank, and they did seem to change up their location and the type of algae they were grazing on a regular basis. Some of the cherry shrimp did seem to have their version of a food coma on day 2, but most of them were still moving around the tank and eating algae consistently. The Nerite snail had moved from one side of the tank to the other, so I knew that it had been active during the night, and I could see small trails on the tank glass, but they are hard to see on camera. Moving on to day 3, and the Sterigani repens is almost spotless already, and the vast majority of the algae is gone. There's also a noticeable amount of algae on the dwarf hairgrass that's been eaten now too, and the shrimp are also working on the algae on the stem plants, but it is still pretty bad. This is actually the first day where I saw the Nerite snail active during the day, and it seemed to be putting some work in on the algae on the hairgrass in the tank. Later that day, I also noticed the Nerite snail active again, chomping its way along the tank glass on the front pane. One of the Amano shrimp was working on the remaining algae on the hairgrass at the front of the tank, while the other 2 were in the rear of the tank feeding on the algae on the stem plants. Unlike day 2, all of the cherry shrimp were active as well, and they were all moving around looking for algae to eat and grazing where they could. Moving on to day 4, and the vast majority of the algae on the Sterigani repens and hairgrass is gone now, and there's also a noticeable amount of algae that's been eaten on the stem plants too. There is still some algae around the base of the hairgrass, but I'm guessing this is an issue with it just being hard to reach for the shrimp with their little arms. Due to so much of the algae already being eaten at this stage, it is difficult to get footage of the algae eaters actually eating any visible algae. The Amano shrimp were consistently picking at stuff on the plants that I couldn't see, so I'm guessing it's tiny little bits of algae. And the cherry shrimp seem to have moved onto the algae that was grown on the stem plants in the tank and be picking at that constantly. I had no idea where the Nerite snail was for day day 4, but I later found out that some nerites will bury themselves into the substrate in a tank to sleep, and I'm guessing that's where he was because I didn't see him for a couple of days. Moving on to day 5, and the amount of algae in the tank was minimal at this stage. There was still a small amount on the base of the hairgrass, but it was far less than day 4, so the shrimp had been picking at it. Both the Sterigani repens and the stem plant in the tank had also been picked clean at this point, and I was actually very impressed with how quickly these little guys had got the job done in this tank because I was expecting it to take a little longer. The Amano shrimp seemed to be finishing off the last few bits of algae on the hairgrass in the tank, while the cherry shrimp were just swimming around looking for grazing areas. Here's the day 6 comparison, and I was actually struggling to see any visible algae in the tank at all by day 6. Even though I couldn't personally see any algae, the shrimp were still picking at things on the plant, so I'm guessing there is tiny little bits of algae growth or biofilm there for them to eat. Some of the shrimp did just seem to be chilling out after having such a busy day, but in reality I'm pretty sure they were just wondering what they could eat next. I still couldn't see the Nerite snail anywhere in the tank, but he did turn up a few days later, so I'm guessing he was just sleeping in the substrate. Anyway, that follow along was around 2 months ago now, and this is the tank today. As you can see, it's free from all algae types and there's little baby cherry shrimp everywhere. The shrimp are still consistently picking at things on the plants, but I'm guessing it's fresh algae and biofilm that they're eating. Thankfully, they do seem to eat all the algae before it grows in, so it doesn't really become a problem anymore. In addition to that, this tank is pretty balanced now, so overall algae growth should be far lower than the initial algae growth for a new tank setup. A similar thing will happen with other types of tank that use a filter as well. As your beneficial bacteria colonies increase and use nutrients in the water, algae growth will be far less, but there will still be some, but these algae eaters will easily keep on top of it. I do target feed the shrimp twice a week to make sure that they do actually have food, once on a Wednesday and once on a Sunday, and by that I mean I intentionally add food specifically for the shrimp to eat. I use Hikari mini algae wafers, and I just break one up into small pieces and throw a few of the pieces in, but most types of algae wafer will work. I've actually seen the Amano shrimp grab fish food from the water column and swim off with it countless times now, because my betta in this tank is a little derpy and it takes a while for him to realise he's being fed. In my experience, there's one main weakness of this algae eating crew, and that's their ability to deal with blackbeard algae. I know that there are clips of some Amano shrimp and some Nerite snails on YouTube of them eating blackbeard algae, but this does seem to be on a case by case basis. I have seen my own Amano shrimp, Neocaridina shrimp and Nerite snails picking at blackbeard algae from time to time, but they never really seem to put a dent in it or be consistent with eating it, so it can become a problem, and it's actually becoming a problem in one of my tanks, but that's for a different video. Another potential weakness of getting rid of algae like this is that larger fish might actually eat some of your shrimp, but for most community tank setups you should be fine. I recently published a video going over keeping guppies with shrimp too, and I've never ever had an issue with my guppy tank and the shrimp in there. In my experience, betta fish can be a little hit and miss though, because my female betta would eat any shrimp she could catch, and one of my males eats the little baby cherry shrimp in his tank, but he doesn't eat the adults, and then one of the other males I've got in this Wallstad tank, he kind of looks at the shrimp but doesn't eat them, but that might change in the future. Anyway guys, I hope that this has been helpful and that it'll be able to help you fight algae in your own aquarium. Thanks for watching and have a good day.